You are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker Podcast.
All right, Storm Tracker Podcast here. I'm Marcus Benjamin here with Frank Tucker representing the Crib, South Florida. We collectively are representing CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals Network. And unfortunately, Frank, the Miami baseball season came to an abrupt end Sunday evening at Mark Light Field, falling to the Texas Longhorns 10-6. I guess they got some get back to us when it comes to basketball in that respect. But unfortunate end to the season. The Hurricanes are eliminated in their home regional for the second year in a row. And, you know, I've been covering this team all year, Frank, and they were just a fun team to watch. And just all of the offensive power was definitely fun to watch. All the home runs, the high scoring was definitely to see. And I just do want to say that this team will end up being that team that never was. You know, I think people will think back at this team and say, wow, there was a lot of great players on this team, and they underachieved. Players like, of course, Yo-Yo Morales is going to be a first round draft pick in the MLB. So we'll get to see him on the next level. But I think there's a bunch of other players on this team that will also make it to the major leagues or have a very good shot at making it to the majors. Blake Sear is off to a great start to his career as a freshman, and he's second on the team in home runs this season. And, you know, he was pretty high in every statistical category. He improved over time defensively at second base. So really excited to see what happens with him. Andrew Walters is a guy who arguably the best closer in the game. And quite frankly, we just didn't see enough of him this season just because, you know, you either just didn't need him or, you know, he just wasn't, there just wasn't a situation where you needed to kind of play him. And there's some other players that I think have a chance to make it to the majors, like CJ Kafis, who's an outstanding hitter, really great at first base as well. Dominic Patelli, arguably one of the best shortstops in baseball this season. And he also provided some power as well, double-digit home runs for Patelli. So those are the guys to me that I think have a legitimate chance to get to the major league. So I like maybe all Miami Hurricanes fans are disappointed in the season just with all the talent that was on this team. But let's talk about more so why this team didn't make it far enough, and it all comes down to pitching and the managing of these pitchers. And to me, baseball comes down to like 5 elements. You know, there's hitting, obviously, there's defense, there's the bullpen, and there is starting pitching, and there's just managing the game or coaching the game. And I think the Hurricanes were really good in defense and hitting, but I think obviously the most important is pitching, starting pitching, and that bullpen, and that's where the Hurricanes really lacked this season. You only had one real reliable ace in Gage Zeal. You had Carson Lagone, who was starting to come on and replace Zeal as the ace in the early part of the season, but then suffered an injury in his throwing arm with inflammation. And we saw that really show its head in the regional, where the first game against Texas, where he got rocked in those first couple of innings, and with the other pitcher who was outstanding, LeBaron Johnson Jr., that's all the Longhorns really needed to win that game, and it was an absolute gem by this kid LeBaron Johnson out of Jacksonville, who ended up being the regional MVP. He pitched a complete game, against that lineup, and I think that's something that doesn't really happen not only in the majors but in college baseball especially. It really doesn't happen. Um, so props to the Longhorns and them advancing out of the regional, but this team just needs more pitching. And and Gino DeMari alluded to that in the post game press conference and really kind of communicated that the depth really hurt this team, and it did. And to be honest, I questioned him starting Zeal in that first game because I think I think you didn't need to start Zeal against arguably the worst statistically team in Maine in that first game. I think you should have saved him for maybe the second or third game, with all of the depth issues that you had starting out this season. This team was behind the eight ball when it came to pitching. They lost Crowther, Kaba, and Walter's little brother, who all were expected to be in the rotation pitching wise. And then, I already talked about Lagone going down, and Rosario and everyone else has been up and down this season when it comes to pitching. Gallo up and down. Torres, he had a really low moment in the ACC tournament championship game, but all around was pretty much kind of solid. Cintas had his moments, up and down moments. Lacarica, I mean, he had a nightmare outing yesterday, which ultimately led to the Hurricanes' demise in that final game. So when you look at this team, they become the team that could have been, because that lineup could be matched up with any lineup in the country, with as many guys that you had hitting double-digit home runs and just the overall run production. It's unfortunate to know that pitching was ultimately the demise of this team. And one last thing I'll say on this team is that I think what really hurt this team is that your best pitcher ultimately was your closer. And your closer really didn't get a lot of innings, naturally. But I think they probably should have considered making Andrew Walters more of a starter, or just to start some games, because he was going several innings during the season. Why not let him pitch, the first three? And I know some people might say, well, who's going to close out the game? You had several guys to give you a solid 1 or 2 innings this season. Torres, as I mentioned, was one of them. Gallo was another one. Even Rosario, I could see could be the closer. But I think the overall perception of Andrew Walters is like he's the best closer in the game, so let's keep him as the closer. But in the final game where you're ultimately eliminated, he never sees the field, because you're never in a situation to really put him in the game. So in hindsight, that to me held this team back, and I would have liked to see a lot more of Andrew Walters on the mound, and changing his position to maybe closer to a starter, I think might have helped this team, especially when they were decimated by injuries. But overall, I think it was a successful season, considering the lack of depth in pitching. I mean, this team came back in 19 games this season, over 120, up to 125 home runs, second most in team history. It's definitely nothing to to hold your head about. It's definitely something to be celebrated, but it's still disappointing to know that they can't get out of their home regional once again. And um, I know a lot of Hurricanes fans from what I see are going to ask for Gino DeMare to leave the program. I'm not necessarily saying that. I know he has family ties to the program, and a player who played here. So he's a great guy, nice guy. But there were just some instances in decision making with pitching that ultimately became his demise. Ultimately, was the demise of this Miami Hurricanes baseball team. But this team is still young. This is still a young team, and they will obviously lose Walters and Morales, and Torres. Um, but a lot of these other guys are coming back, and I think if you just add a few more a few more pitches, I mean, the transfer portal, it works in baseball too. If you add a few more pieces to this pitching staff, then I think Miami's going to be right back in the same situation, hosting a regional, but hopefully better pitching can carry them to the next round.
Yeah, so I think the season was pretty much culminated in that last game, right? That third inning, you allowed 9 runs. It's really kind of been what the season has been. You talked about 19 comeback wins, cardiac canes, and that's interesting, and that makes it fun, and it makes it an exciting season, right? And you got guys hitting for 20 homers like Yo-Yo, but overall, pitching is what wins the World Series, right? If you look at the Wake Forest of the world, you look at the Vanderbilts of the world, time and time again, they always have the best pitching in college baseball, and that's really what pushes them to that level that you're starting to see Miami not be able to reach at all. So, I think Miami has everything in place positionally and at the plate, but it's pitching is where you got to go get it. Like you saw Wake Forest go get some guys out of the transfer portal that really helped them with pitching this past off season. And it's tough in baseball because with baseball recruiting, you have guys that are able to go to the MLB draft out of high school. And a lot of times Miami's in that top 5 recruiting class for baseball. And they have guys that are elite starters that are committed to them, but don't actually come to the University of Miami because they end up getting drafted because they're throwing 95 plus, or they got a 5-pitch arsenal. So it's going to be tough. We'll see how it goes, right? I think Miami baseball is in a solid spot. It's overall disappointing that they don't get to the College World Series, but it's not like they got run out of the regionals in a bad way. They made it down to the last game against Texas. We know Texas is a 40-plus win team, so they're one of the better teams in college baseball. Not everybody can make it to the final show. And honestly, I felt like it was a decent season. At the beginning of the year, we started it off with, I think it was a rough series against Penn State. And we were starting to talk about this team had no chance, right? And then at the end of the year, we're saying that they should make it. So that means that there was progression. And I think that's a good sign. And I know everybody wants to fire Gino DeMare because of his ties with his dad and money being thrown into the program. But at the end of the day, man, baseball is one of those sports where we see it time and time again where the best team doesn't always win, right? The Yankees are able to put a bunch of guys hitting 35-plus homers on the same roster, but if you don't have pitching, you ain't going to win. So, and unfortunately in college baseball, you're not purchasing guys in the same way that you do in the other college sports. So it's going to be a little bit tougher, and it's going to be interesting to see next year. You got guys like Blake Sear coming back, the Carrier kid, who I think is going to be an absolute stud as soon as next season. He was really good this year. Started off kind of on the bench, not really playing, and now I would say he's one of the cornerstones of the lineup. So going to be a fun year next year. I think people should probably be more positive than they are negative about the season. I know expectations for Miami baseball, the College World Series, and having a chance at winning the whole thing. But listen, they made a run. Texas is a really good team. I wouldn't be surprised for for them to be one of those final teams at the end of the season, and on to next year, right?
Yeah, definitely on to next year. On a positive note, I did have a Mark Light milkshake yesterday.
Did you have the lobster one?
I had the lobster, bro.
Oh no! Why
Yeah.
did you do that?
I had the lobster, man. It was actually pretty good. I mean, it's I felt my stomach rumbling a little bit, like kind of
How is it good? You're putting lobster in milk. What are we doing?
I mean, it was pretty good. I mean, it wasn't a bunch of lobster in there. It was some lobster. You kind of chewed it a little bit going down, but it wasn't terrible. It wasn't terrible. So.
Was that the only milkshake that they had available?
No, they had all the flavors available, but that's the one I wanted to try out of the three. I wasn't gonna try that brisket with the barbecue sauce and the cornbread.
Oh my god!
And I wasn't gonna try that Louisiana one with the Tabasco sauce in it. Like that just sounds too weird for me. So I was like, out of the three, I'm gonna do the lobster. It's mostly vanilla anyway. So I thought it was pretty decent. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't terrible.
Oh.
but yeah, it was a good experience. Always a great experience at the Light. On to next year, man, and we will see what happens. And there is an outside chance that Yo-Yo maybe stays. I think it's maybe a 1% chance. I think the Heat have a better chance, or had a better chance that the ESPN was predicting at 3% to beat the Celtics. But my guys are still in the NBA Finals. We just got split last night, and Panthers going to come back with another split, hopefully. But on to more Canes news, because I know that's kind of a sore spot for you, Frank. It's June, man. It's officially June, so it's a big recruiting month for every team in the country. But down here in South Florida, the Miami Hurricanes will host a bunch of camps. They'll have a prospect camp this week. Had one yesterday as well. Frank, you were out there. You saw some of the guys that were out there, guys that we're already very familiar with down here in South Florida. Just your thoughts on what you saw out there, and any news coming from that prospect camp.
It was your traditional first prospect camp for a school, right? You had some guys out there, but overall it really wasn't talent heavy. Jabari Brady, a star freshman, was out there. Samari Reed, a sophomore offered athlete at a Monarch as well. Waden Charles was putting on a show out there. But then you had a lot of young kids like Zach Katz, who's a 2027 quarterback that is going to be a Power 5 prospect coming up through South Florida. Going to be one of the better quarterbacks that we've seen in a long time. He was out there throwing, but again, he's an 8th grader. So it was Jade Card from Norland, Jamari Smith, who's also a Norland receiver. Both of them were offered by Toledo. This was a mega camp type situation where Toledo was out there, Western Michigan was out there, and I think that Allen University was also out there. Like there was a few schools, a lot of Group of 5 schools. So I think that there was probably better recruiting for the Power 5 schools than there was for the University of Miami. But I think the most important part of this weekend was the official visits that Miami had. And, I know we're going to segue into that, but, it was good to have Waden Charles on campus. And I think that the continuing relationship being built with Jabari Brady is going to be a very important one, because we both know that he is going to be one of the top prospects in the country. And when that 2026 ranking comes out, he will be a top 100 player. Borderline maybe top 25 at 6'4", 200 pounds almost, running a 10.500 with 2 years varsity production. I mean, he fits the mold. It's him and Malachi Toney in the conversation for that number 1 receiver spot in the country. So glad that Miami is on him very early. You saw coaches talking to him, especially at the end of the camp, and I think that Miami's in a good spot there. We spoke to him a couple weeks back. Go check out that article on CanesCounty.com. You can find it under Jabari Brady's profile. But want to segue into those officials now?
Yeah, just a little bit on my thoughts on Wade and Charles. I think he's a really, really, really good player. I the feelings that I have for him right now are the same. I hate to say this because I hate comparing kids, but it's the same that I had for Jeremiah Smith when it was his sophomore year. Like as far as his athleticism, his speed, his just location of football. Now, I think Jeremiah Smith ends up being a better talent than Wade and Charles, but the, there are a lot of similarities, and I think his recruitment is going to skyrocket. But one quick question though, he's still at Somerset, right?
Somerset Canyons and Boynton Beach, and
You
kid
think
is
he stays there?
I do. I think that he's a Palm Beach kid through and through. And, he came out there with his offense coordinator. Actually, that's the guy who brought him out there to the Miami camp. And they've taken him to a number of different schools this offseason. And despite interest from a lot of different places, he has stayed loyal through and through. And I think that's another testament to the type of kid, like the type of kid that Wade and Charles is. I think he's a little bit more of a faster version of a Chance Robinson. I think that's a pretty good comparison. A guy who has top 200 potential, maybe top 150. I think we're going to see a rise from both players, including Chance Robinson. I think Wade and Charles is going to be that high 4-star type player. I don't think he ever reaches that 5-star type of market. He's already over 30 offers, so the recruiting resume is pretty elite. Once we start to see Alabamas and schools like that start to pop, I think things get really interesting for him. But at 6'2", 6'3", 185, 190 pounds with good speed, we've seen him go against the best of the best in the 2024 class in the 7-on-7 settings, plus have a 1,000-yard season while playing both sides of the football at Somerset. Despite lower competition, he dominated the way that he should. So one of the elite players in that 2025 class. Love what I see from him. You got a loaded group. You got Josh Moore. You got him. You got Cortez Mills. Right. That's a Kamari Williams, Kyle Washington from Chaminade Madonna. That is a really good 2025 receiver class, and I think he's one of the main guys in that group. I think it's really good that Miami's in a good spot with him. They offered early, and I think that Miami's probably his number one school right now.
Awesome. Good to hear. Let's get into the big name players that visited Miami this weekend and just kind of the chances of Miami landing these big name guys. Of course, you can see our official visitors list on CanesCounty.com. One of those players on that list was Kamarion Franklin, the big D lineman out of Mississippi. And he made it and also put Miami in his top 5 within the past week. So there's definitely a possibility anytime Miami's in the top 5. Well, for any kid, there's a big possibility that he chooses Miami with one of the best closers in the game in Mario Cristobal. So excited to see where that recruitment goes. But some other players as well did visit Miami, like Jerrae Hawkins, Traylon Miller, James Nesta is a player I think is trending towards Miami. A lot of momentum building with this kid. Seems to really like what he saw in Coral Gables, and then Wyatt Gilmore is also a player that has Miami in his top 5 schools. So definitely some momentum building with that defensive end as well. What it tells me is that Jason Taylor, man, is a valuable asset. I mean that's probably the most obvious take I've had all year. But like the fact that all of these defensive ends and there's going to be more, and there's more that we haven't really talked about, our defensive linemen that we talked that are thinking about Miami. So with all that being said, I mean, out of this group, who do you think is trending towards Miami the most?
I think that Kamarion Franklin is trending heavy, but I don't know if I could say that Miami's a favorite right now. Tank Hawkins, I think Miami's a favorite there. I know that some people have kind of talked about West Virginia because he's a native there, and them potentially being a favorite. But I think the selling of him being a potential Tank Dell in this Shannon Dawson offense is something that is intriguing to him. He spoke to one of our national analysts, John Garcia, yesterday about what Miami brings to the table, what they communicated to him on what his role could be here. And we don't see Miami really recruiting slot receivers heavily in this cycle. They went and got Robbie Washington and Ray Joseph in the last class. And I think that Tank Hawkins is that guy to be the slot receiver of this class. You got Chance Robinson. They're going hard after Jeremiah Smith, Josiah Traders, Wayne McCoys, guys like that. Drayon Miller, who was also on a visit. I think Texas A&M still probably a favorite there, but Miami's still pushing. He's that guy that I think that they're trying to bring in as the speed threat of that group. And I think Miami's in a good spot coming off the visit this weekend. Drayon Miller, like I said, I think that's a Texas A&M lead. I think Miami is going to keep pushing, and he's a top 50 prospect in the country, but I just don't know if that one happens. He's a Texas native, so it's going to be a hard pull. I would rather see Miami pull from the South Florida pool of talent than go get a guy from Texas that you might have to beg to come rather than, just get him in the boat because he wants to be here. James Nesta, you already talked about him. Miami's the favorite there. They weren't even included in his top 8. You and I spoke about that off the podcast. And the fact that they've moved up so quickly is really a good sign. I know he's another 3-star, right? We're going to talk about Miami recruiting 3-stars, right? But at the end of the day, he's a 6'5" athletic edge guy who could play outside linebacker if they really wanted to transition him to that spot. But I think he's going to be a really good pass rusher at the next level with some length, some versatility in the frame to put on some really good weight. And I think he could be a guy that moves pretty high in the rankings. He could be a low 4-star prospect by the end of the cycle. And Wyatt Gilmore, that's a little bit of a weird one for me. You don't see many guys from Minnesota make their way down to Miami. We spoke to him earlier in the cycle about Miami. There was a lot of love there. He liked what he was hearing. This was before Jason Taylor got the job, I believe. So him and Joe Salavea have kind of built a good relationship. He's a bigger player, already over 250 pounds. So I think he's probably more of an inside guy than an edge guy like a James Nesta. So we'll see about that one. I think Minnesota's probably going to end up getting that one just because homegrown kid, and I don't know if that kid's going to end up making that cross-country move to the University of Miami, despite a need for depth at that 4-eye, 3 technique type spot. Demetrius Freeney is the one that I absolutely love the fit to the University of Miami. You lose a guy to the portal and Terry Roberts, who came over from Iowa. It was a quick turnaround in his transfer portal experience.
Still going, actually. So
still going, right? Like, he comes to Miami as a guy who's supposed to be that versatile piece. He was supposed to kind of be that Al Blades replacement, right? Like, we thought Al Blades was going to be that guy that could play corner, could play safety last year, especially with the injuries that Miami has had. You need guys that can be smart enough to play all 5 positions in the defensive backfield. Miami loses that now, right? The Jedias Richard kid, I think he could fill that role, but I think that they're looking for him as a potential Johnny Wilson type cancellation type guy, right? The guy who at 6'2", 200 pounds, running sub 1100, could keep up with the bigger receivers of college football that are vertical threats and on the outside. I don't think that they're sold on Darryl Porter. I think that this is a Jedias Richard and Devontae Brown type situation, 2 guys that are over 6'1" and fill the need of giving Miami length with the ability to cover vertically. And Demetrius Freeney is also another one of those guys, 6'1", 190 pounds, sub 1100 time, sub 22 in the 200. So he's got that athleticism that you want on the back end of the defense, something we didn't see from guys like DJ Ivey. And I think that he would be a perfect fit on this defense, right? You continue to add length. He has 4 years to play 3, which is another big thing. He was a qualifier out of high school, So was just kind of an undiscovered gem rather than being a guy that had some background issues, right? And California native, the rest of the schools he's looking at, like Houston, Colorado, Indiana, that I don't know if they fit that tropical vibe of what he's kind of accustomed to. He's even playing junior college in the California ranks. So I love the fit there. I think that with Jamil Adai, our defensive back coach, going after him personally, I think Miami's in a good spot in that recruitment.
Definitely sounds like it is trending towards Miami with Freeney, 6'1", 190 pounds, originally from the 2023 class. But Miami is looking at other DBs as well for the 2024 class, and a couple of Georgia Bulldog commits potentially, could flip to Miami. And both of these guys, Ellis Robinson and Jaylen Heyward, are outstanding talents to me. Both, currently playing in the state of Florida, one at Rockledge and one at IMG. So the proximity is an advantage for Miami. But the fact that the Miami's continue to push for these guys is kind of just great to hear in itself, that they're not afraid to go after guys, even though they're committed to the two-time national champions. So Miami, as we know, can recruit with anybody, but how real is this smoke that they could possibly flip to Miami?
Yeah, so Jaylen Heyward, keep an eye out. Keep an eye out on that. We talked about it, about a week ago, that there's a flip situation potentially coming this summer. And when he comes on his official visit, that's where my eyes are really peeled. The Ellis Robinson situation is kind of interesting. I know that he's constantly been on campus, has been multiple times this offseason, taking that official. And IMG's been a pipeline for Miami. But at the end of the day, he still has a close relationship with a number of players that are on that Georgia team and are in that recruiting class. And he's still recruiting guys to Georgia. If he wasn't recruiting guys to Georgia, I would be feeling much better about this situation. And I know people are going to be like, oh, kids do that just to keep things, where they're at, right? Status quo, don't want to, set off too many alarms. I don't think that's the case. If this is a kid that controls his future, controls his path, and as arguably the top corner in the class, he can kind of dictate on how he wants this recruitment to go. He doesn't have to be pushing guys to end up in the class with him at Georgia, because it's hard to go from pushing a guy to go to Georgia to pushing them to come with you to Miami. So I still think Miami is ways off with Ellis Robinson. I know the raw Miami, his 7-on-7 team's relationship is tight with Miami, but overall, this is going to come down to the very end, in my opinion. I think that Miami's got their word cut out with Ellis Robinson, but I think that a flip candidate in Jaylen Heyward is a real thing.
A flip, I think, is a real thing as far as, some raw players, as in the 7-on-7 team, is Luane McCoy, man. Like, I really think that is a real legit possibility. I get the sense that he committed to Florida State because, obviously he established a relationship with them. But I really feel like he was hoping that Miami jumped on him earlier than Florida State. And I think if that would have happened, I think he would have committed to Miami instead of committing to Florida State. So now that Miami is on him, as hard as they are now, from when I last spoke to him, you can check that article out on canescounty.com. They are really pushing for McCoy and just continuing to build a relationship with him, and that's something I could definitely see happening. Wouldn't be surprised at all, especially from Miami Central and the pipeline that is firmly being established from 95th Street to Coral Gables. That's something I wouldn't be surprised about at all. Another player that is a possible flip, and it's the biggest name on the board, obviously, and that's Jeremiah Smith. And Jeremiah Smith did visit Georgia recently. There are, rumblings about him, of course, officially visiting Miami as well.
Was that Florida? Was that Florida this past weekend?
Was at Florida this past weekend. Has a great relationship with Kevin Beard. So I think he's definitely putting his feelers out there, and I wouldn't bet the house on him signing with Ohio State just yet. But what are you hearing anything about him officially visiting Miami?
Yeah, so an official visit is happening, right? And we're gonna have more on that on Canes County as soon as today. So it's happening. Like that's in the works. They haven't. I think the date is June 23rd. I believe the date was.
Okay.
So we'll get that out to you.
That's the Legends Camp weekend.
Yeah, so he is going to be visiting that weekend. It's the same week that Judd Anderson is in town. So I don't know if they're going to be able to get Judd out there earlier than expected to kind of make that push from the quarterback to him, because we know that's a big sell for Jeremiah right now. Who is the quarterback that you're bringing in with him? And we've seen that time and time again be a factor with the number one receiver coming out of South Florida. And I think that Dylan Raiola and him have a good relationship. He's a guy that is recruiting him extremely hard to the University of Georgia. DJ Lagway is another top quarterback that is recruiting him heavily to the University of Florida. And I think that's why you're seeing those two teams really make that jump and make things interesting with Ohio State, because I don't know what the relationship like was with Aaron Nolan. It seems like it's okay. They have a little bit of experience together playing in 7-on-7. But from what I heard, I don't know if he's necessarily sold on Aaron Nolan, not from Jeremiah, just from outside sources, right? So I think that a flip could happen. I don't know if he ends up at Ohio State. I don't think that the Ohio State fans are handling their recruitment really well, or they're kind of going at Jeremiah in a big way. And I think that the Ohio State staff is handling it right, though. They're letting him go through his process. They're not bugging him. But I do think that they are a little worried. But I think there are other factors that have come into play in his recruitment as of late. And I think that's going to help Miami in this case. And I think that an official visit to Miami, where Miami can show how much of a priority he really is on a week where it's top visitors coming, and I believe he's visiting midweek. So he's going to get that personal time with the coaching staff. He's going to get that personal time with Kevin Beard, who he's talked about in an extremely positive way. He's talked about Shannon Dawson in an extremely positive way. That connection with Geno Smith, his NFL cousin, is something that I think plays in Miami's favor. And I think that Miami is targeting 4 to 5-star quarterbacks right now. And we're going to talk about one in just a little bit that is trending to Miami. But that is part of the reason why I think that they're trying to do whatever they can to make sure that they grab these top receivers in this class so they can flip the room the same way they did with the offensive line, the same way that they're doing with the defensive line in this class. So I think that he's a strong flip candidate, maybe not to Miami, because I think Georgia and Florida in the race, but this is going to come down to the wire for sure.
Yeah. You talk about quarterback, and this is no disrespect to Judd Anderson, but he's just not as highly rated as a Aaron Nolan, Lagway, or Raiola. It's just based on just the ratings. If we're looking at the ratings as our measuring stick, and that could definitely could be a detriment for Miami recruiting the top receivers, and that includes Jeremiah Smith. But there is one quarterback out there, a young one who's also committed to another school that Miami has gained some momentum with, and he is a state champion, and he is just an impressive kid from his freshman, maybe his even 8th grade year. I'm not quite sure if he was playing as an 8th grader up there.
He was rotating. He was rotating as an 8th grader.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, and that's Colin Hurley, man. Colin Hurley is a guy that, from what we see, Shannon Dawson is really high on. What are the chances of that Miami flips this kid?
Yeah, so we reported about a week ago that there was some interest from Shannon Dawson with Colin Hurley, right? I was told from a source that was the top guy on his board outside of Judd Anderson, and there's a relationship there with Miami previous to Dawson, right? South Florida native, kind of was rumors that he was going to come play high school ball down here. Had been on campus several times. Where Miami was one of his top schools before he eventually committed to LSU. And I think part of the reason he eventually chose LSU over Miami was just the inconsistencies at developing quarterbacks in recent memory at the University of Miami. And then there was the issue with Josh Gaddis not being locked in for the job long term. So now you got a guy like Shannon Dawson who's kind of brought stability to that offensive recruiting and kind of bringing in an offense that I think intrigues a lot of receivers and quarterbacks alike. So I'm hearing that things are not as sunny on the LSU front as they probably appear to be. I'm hearing that he is the quarterback coach's guy, and the quarterback coach is not a guy who's been at LSU for a long time. And he's going to be a strong head coach candidate as one of the young coaches in college football. We reported on this on the message boards for CanesCounty.com. If you go check that out there, we got all the details. But I like where Miami is right now. Now they got to get him on. They got to get him on a visit, right? If you don't get him on a visit, then there's really no chance. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a secret visit to happen. Obviously, we probably will try to avoid reporting on that. we know what happens in those situations here in the Miami Hurricanes universe. But honestly, man, I like where Miami's at, and I think that he's the target to watch. We know that things have been really quiet on the quarterback front since Judd Anderson committed and Aaron Nolan decided to go to Ohio State. There was a little bit of smoke with Mabry Matauer, who was a Wisconsin quarterback. Nothing really came about that. He was more so one of those guys that, seemed to have a dream offer from Miami originally and is now heavily recruiting for Wisconsin. So kind of like an Ellis Robinson situation. I don't foresee a flip happening there, but I think it's definitely something to watch. It's obviously being heavily reported now that Colin Hurley is a Miami target, but just glad we jumped on that when we did. And there's some strong clues there that a match could be made to get him back home.
Definitely would be a very good addition to the 2025 class, but he could.
No, he's 20. He's 24.
He's 24 now. Oh yeah, that's right.
He reclassified. Remember, he was Miami's top target in 25, right? And then reclassified to 2024. Him and Davie Belfort were the two guys that did that and stayed in the top 10 of the quarterback rankings. So he's the guy. Listen, Miami is always. I think that Miami's going to continue to go down this path of they're going to take the guy that they want evaluation-wise, which was Judd Anderson. And we saw them do the same thing with Emory Williams. That's the guy that they like. That's the guy that they think that they can build up and develop. But they also know that you can't build a class around a guy with no recruiting prowess. So what do? You go get the high floor, maybe not as high ceiling guy who's a high 4-star prospect or a borderline 5-star prospect, and you bring them in, and that's the guy that sells your class. He might not be the guy that you foresee as a starter at the position, but he's a guy that has the ability to be a fallback option as a blue chip prospect. Might not fit exactly what you want, but you know that you can be able to build. You can say, I have this guy. He's the same thing as what you got at Ohio State. He might not be the number one quarterback in the country like what Georgia has, but right, if you look at DJ Lagway's numbers, he is the least productive quarterback of any top prospect in the 2024 class. Right, sub 60 completion percentage doesn't have a winning record on Friday nights. Doesn't put up huge numbers. Is a really good athlete, but if you want to talk about that guy, right, DJ Lagway, Miami's essentially got him in Ja'Carri Brown. So, right, like it's not like Miami is behind the eight ball recruiting compared to the University of Florida, because they got a guy who might be higher in the rankings, but isn't better than Colin Hurley probably, and fits the mold of a guy that Miami already has in the building and is in a redshirt this season. So he's going to have 3 years to be the guy at the University of Miami. So I think that Miami eventually is gonna bypass the likes of Florida for Jeremiah Smiths and top targets like that, because there's only so long where you can sell fake numbers and NIL and sell a quarterback that has bad production, because he's going to have to play football this fall, right? And we saw guys like Jaden Rashada who had questionable resumes coming into their senior year.
I was just going to mention Jaden Rashada, because the way you described Colin Hurley was very similar to how Jaden Rashada was recruited, because from what I heard, he was more that guy that they weren't completely sold on, but they wanted him to kind of be in the wave of recruits to kind of generate some buzz for the program, which it did. Of course, he ended up going somewhere else where he didn't end up landing eventually. We all know about that whole NIL story. But yeah, I think Colin Hurley has the potential to be the next Jaden Rashada that actually stays with the class.
Yeah, but and listen, I think like we're mixing some Jaden Rashada narratives right now, right? I think DJ Lagway has a Jaden Rashada type resume. I think he's going to come into this year with a very high ranking, and I think he's going to drop down. I just don't think that he's done anything other than maybe some flashes in 7-on-7 and some rushing ability to show that he's the number one quarterback in the class, or should be in the conversation for that. I think Colin Hurley has been a very productive quarterback, has won a state championship as a starter at Trinity. And I think that, Miami is going to be able to sell the kids and say, listen, this guy is not the guy who you think he is over there, right? We are able to develop our guys over here. Shannon Dawson has proven that time and time again, right? Clayton Tune was not some ballyhooed prospect that he brought in at Houston, but he turned him into an NFL quarterback and one of the most productive quarterbacks in the country. So I love what the staff is doing. I think that they're keeping Miami in the race for a number of top targets in the offensive skill position spots, and now Colin Hurley. So I'm interested to see what the next step is going to be in that progression of that Colin Hurley recruitment.
Yeah, and if they end up getting Colin Hurley, let's just say they do, I think it really sets up this team nicely as far as this quarterback position, because you still have Emory Williams that is still, kind of learning the position as far as being a quarterback on the college level. Ja'Carri Brown, you're hoping will continue to develop. And Judd Anderson is a legit 2024 player with a lot of size and athleticism and upside. And then you've got Colin Hurley, to me, is the more talented thrower of the football, but he is a 2024 talent that is a 2025 age, so he's still a young guy that you're going to potentially bring in early that may sit for a year or two, and then you have that kid sitting behind a potential Ja'Carri Brown, Emory Williams, Judd Anderson, and you've got this kid just kind of waiting in the wings. Of course, we're kind of way ahead of that whole process, but it definitely sounds nice, if they are able to get Colin Hurley in an in-state type of talent, keep him home, and you said originally, from down here or whatnot. It would be a great get for the Miami Hurricanes at the quarterback position, really solidifying that position for the future. So with that being said, man, the potential of this class is through the roof, man. It really is through the roof. I mean, we already talked about Kamarian Franklin, a 5-star who visited this weekend. A lot of smoke on 5-star Justin Scott potentially committing to the program Dylan Williams, another very talented, or Dylan Stewart, I think is his last name. Sorry, potentially, you know, gaining a lot of traction with Miami as well. You talked about Tank, Hawkins. I mean, there's just a ton of players that could potentially commit to Miami. As you know, we didn't even talk about Josiah Trader or Lawayne McCoy. Um, there's a lot of 3-star guys currently in the class right now, but there's certainly more 4-star potential, 4 and 5-star potential to land in this class. Last year, Miami was able to land a top 10 class. This year, what happens? Another top 10 class for Miami?
I definitely think it's going to be another top 10 class. And I think you're going to see guys like Vincent Shavers rise up. I think Chris Wheatley-Humphrey's another guy that can rise up to those 4-star, rankings just because of the speed that he has. We saw Chris Johnson make that same jump. I think it's going to be very similar. So I think Miami's in a really good spot. I think that they're going to, even if they don't grab a Colin Hurley, I think they're going to do so well at the defensive line position and at receiver that it's going to elevate this class really high up. And I think defensive back wise, you get a Zaquan Patterson, you get a Jaylen Heyward, Isaiah Thomas, already a blue chip prospect. You potentially flip an Ellis Robinson, and you're looking at borderline top 5 class, right? I think they finished at 7 in this last one. Yeah. Would not be surprised if they're in that same range for this class. Obviously, you got to pull some whales. We know that they're whale fishing. They're going after them, right? Kamarion Franklin was the first official visit of the 5-star ranks for Miami, but we're going to see a lot more over the next few weeks. And I'm interested to see how the next month goes, right? Because we've talked about it off air, right? That there's upwards of 17 guys that could commit over the next month or so from these official visits. And I think if you get close to that 20 mark coming out of the summer, then you got a solid base before you start trying to go get the big whales like the Jeremiah Smiths into the fall.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I 100% agree. There's nothing that tells me otherwise, especially with adding a Jason Taylor and a Kevin Beard. I think adding those two coaches as recruiters is really going to elevate this program. Of course, Tim Harris Jr. Doing a great job as well. Already got Chris Wheatley-Humphrey on board. I just think the potential for this program, I think, can actually be better than last year. I think that Miami was flirting with a top 3 class last season, and depending on who you talk to, a lot of people think that Miami's class was top 5 last cycle, and we've yet to see some of the players that from that class even step on Greentree officially as of yet. So the jury's still out on how good that 2023 class is. But this 2024 class really has the potential to be great. I think they're building a solid base with the so-called 3 stars that, like you said, I think a lot of these players will end up having a higher rating by the end of the season. So I would actually bet that Miami gets a top 10 class again this season. I think it's okay if that's a bet that's open on FanDuel or Bovada or whatever you bet on. I would take it right now. I really would. I'd say Miami's going to have another top 10 class this season. And when you put 2 top 10 classes together, it usually equals a championship, at least the conference championship. And that's what Miami is trying to build toward. So I would say the odds are definitely in Miami's favor. All right. So anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this thing up?
Nah, just listen. Stay faithful, Miami fans. Trust the evaluations, even if they grab a few three. Like if a Wyatt Gilmore commits, who's a 3-star prospect, you gotta trust the evaluations, guys. These coaches are exhausting the evaluations on these guys, and they're picking guys that fit what they want to do going forward. They're not fitting what we think are the best players in the class. They're fitting what they feel is the best guy that fits this program. And that's who they're going to grab, and that's who they're targeting. So trust the guys that are making a lot of money to do these things. And Miami is on the right path. Miami's on the right path. 8-9 wins this year. You get to double digits a year after that. You continue to go down the path to the Clemson recruiting where you're getting guys. Remember, this is the Clemson model of what Miami is doing. Clemson wasn't getting top 5 classes at the beginning of Dabo Swinney's tenure. He was grabbing certain guys that were culture fits, that fit what they wanted to do schematically, right? You have building block players like CJ Spiller. You got a Cam Kinchins, right? And you keep going from there to there to there to there, and it's step by step. I know we are tired of losing for the University of Miami, and it's tough to watch 20-plus years of mediocrity in a way. But overall, this team was not conducive to winning double-digit games upon Mario Cristobal's arrival, and he's doing everything that he can to get it to the right spot. So trust the evaluations. We're going to continue to say that. We're hashtagging it. Hashtag trust evaluations, and it's going to be a fun couple of weeks in recruiting.
Yeah, trust the evaluation, and trust CanesCounty.com to continue to bring you news and information, like inside information that we had first about Colin Hurley. It is free to subscribe to CanesCounty.com for the first 30 days. You see that promo code scrolling down at the bottom there, Miami 30. Also, make sure you subscribe to this channel as well, live from Canes County. We'll continue to bring you press conferences, interviews, highlights, podcasts as these. We bring our guy Larry Bluestein on these podcasts as well as other guests. So it's going to be a big summer for the Hurricanes and also for CanesCounty.com. Continue to stay tuned in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.